In 40 years on the bench, I've watched defendants lie, cry, bargain, and sometimes break down in ways that quietly changed the rest of their lives. But this case stayed with me longer than most because the danger in it never came from fists. It came from intimidation, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't leave a mark, but leaves a person afraid to sleep with the lights off. A young man raised in comfort thought he could threaten a witness right in front of me, as if my courtroom were his family's boardroom and I was just another employee to be managed. I remember thinking, if I don't stop this today, somebody is going to get hurt tomorrow. So let me tell you exactly what happened, start to finish, the way I lived it. Before we get into it, if you've found your way to these stories and you like hearing what really happens behind that bench, go ahead and subscribe. It helps more than you'd think, and I've got a lot more of these to tell. When this case landed on my desk, it came with a note clipped to the front of the file that I've learned never to ignore. Potential witness intimidation. Review carefully. That phrase gets my full attention every single time because courts are built to handle arguments. We are built to handle anger, even ugliness, if it stays inside the boundaries of the law. But the moment someone tries to frighten a witness into silence, they are not simply breaking a rule of conduct. They are attacking the foundation the entire system stands on. Take away a witness's ability to speak freely, and you don't have a courtroom anymore. You have a performance. The underlying matter was a criminal complaint tied to a confrontation in a parking lot outside a downtown restaurant, the kind of place with valet stands and string lights and a line out the door on a Friday night. The defendant was the son of a prominent CEO, a name people in business circles would recognize immediately, the sort of name that comes attached to a driver, private schooling from kindergarten onward, and a lifetime of people saying yes to him before he'd even finished the sentence. The witness, and the man the whole case would eventually turn on, was Harold Thompson, 69 years old, a Vietnam veteran who spent his retirement doing part-time security work and volunteering at community events around town. Soft-spoken, respectful, not remotely the kind of man who goes looking for trouble. If anything, trouble had to come find him. The charges included disorderly conduct and a threatening-related offense connected to what the defendant said that night in the parking lot, along with additional allegations that surfaced afterward involving attempts to contact the witness outside of court. Before the hearing, I sat with the police report, a written witness statement, security footage pulled from a camera mounted near the restaurant's side entrance, and a short video captured on a bystander's phone. And as I read through it all, one thought kept circling back to me. This young man doesn't simply believe he's above the rules. He believes he can rewrite the rules in real time, on the spot, just by saying so. That's the moment I understood this case was going to be a test of boundaries, mine included. Here's what happened that night, according to the witnesses and the footage I reviewed personally more than once, because I never trust a single pass-through evidence like this. It was a busy Friday evening, sidewalks crowded, restaurants spilling their overflow crowds out onto the curb. Mr. Thompson was working paid security for a small private event nearby. Nothing glamorous, just making sure the driveway stayed clear, making sure nobody got hurt, stepping in when tempers started to climb. The defendant pulled up in a luxury vehicle and, according to the report, tried to park directly in a space that was clearly marked and blocked off for emergency access. Mr. Thompson walked over calmly and said, "Sir, you can't park there. You'll need to move." Now, I have done this long enough to know how these moments usually play out. Most people grumble, maybe mutter something under their breath, and move the car. But some people hear the word no and experience it as an insult, a personal affront, something that demands correction. According to the witness statement, the defendant leaned out of the window and said, "Who are you supposed to be?" Mr. Thompson answered plainly, "I'm the security guard. I'm just doing my job." The defendant reportedly replied, "Your job is to get out of my way." Mr. Thompson didn't raise his voice. The footage shows him standing with his palms open, non-threatening, gesturing calmly toward an open space just a few car lengths down. That's when it escalated. The report states the defendant stepped out of the vehicle, chest forward, closing the distance until Mr. Thompson had to take a step back just to keep space between them. The bystander's phone video caught part of the exchange, and you can hear Mr. Thompson's voice on it saying, "Sir, please don't do this." And then came the threat. According to multiple witnesses, the defendant said, "I know people. I can make your life miserable." He allegedly invoked his father's position, the CEO, and implied that Mr. Thompson would lose his work, lose his contracts, lose everything he'd built in his retirement. When I watched that clip for the first time, my jaw tightened, not out of anger exactly, more out of recognition. That's a very specific kind of threat, not "I'll fight you." That would almost be simpler. This was "I'll ruin you." It's the sentence powerful people reach for when they've mistaken power for permission. If you're finding this story compelling so far, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. It genuinely helps these cases reach more people, and there's more waiting for you. Mr. Thompson walked away and radioed for assistance. Police were called, and the defendant left the scene before officers arrived. But the report noted that later that same night, Mr. Thompson received a call from an unknown number, silence on the other end, then another call, then a text message that read, "You're going to regret this." That's how it landed in front of me. And reading that line in the file, I couldn't help but think, if he'll do this in public in a parking lot full of witnesses, what exactly is he willing to do when nobody's watching? As I kept working through the evidence, I did what I always do in cases like this. I looked for corroboration, different camera angles, consistent accounts across separate statements, the line between exaggeration and truth. The security footage didn't capture every word that was said, but it captured plenty: the body language, the closing distance, the posture of escalation on one side and retreat on the other. The bystander video captured the tone, sharp, dismissive, cutting, and the written statements, Mr. Thompson's along with two independent witnesses, matched on the key details: the blocked emergency access, the request to move, the defendant exiting the vehicle, the intimidation, the specific threat about ruining him. The phone records attached to the file didn't conclusively prove who placed those anonymous calls, but they established a pattern that supported the witnesses' stated fear, and that fear mattered enormously, because the entire system depends on witnesses being able to speak without wondering whether someone will punish them for it once they step outside the courthouse doors. What struck me most, reading through all of this, was the apparent calculation behind the defendant's behavior. This wasn't wild, uncontrolled rage. It read as a strategic message: I have more power than you, so your truth doesn't matter. The medical documentation in this case wasn't the centerpiece. And I want to be clear about something here, because it matters beyond just this one file. There was no major physical injury. But you do not need bruises to be harmed. Intimidation can steal a person's sleep. It can make someone afraid to leave their own home. It can take a 69-year-old veteran, a man who served his country and then spent his retirement quietly serving his community, and make him feel like he has to choose between his safety and his honesty. By the time I closed that file, I had a clear sense of what I needed to do once this reached my courtroom: stay calm, stay fair, and draw a hard, immovable line around witness safety. Because if a witness can be threatened on the stand, or threatened for simply agreeing to take the stand, then a courtroom stops being a place of justice and becomes a place of fear instead. My job, as I understand it after all these years, is to make absolutely certain fear does not win. By the time this case reached my courtroom, word of it had already started circulating, especially one phrase the defendant allegedly used at the scene and reportedly repeated online not long after: the idea that people like him simply don't face consequences. My clerk mentioned there was chatter online, people debating whether a wealthy CEO's son could talk his way or intimidate his way out of real trouble. Some people were angry about it, some were cynical, some just sounded tired. But here's what I've told people for years, and what I still believe. It doesn't matter whether a case trends online or never leaves the four walls of the courtroom. In my courtroom, everyone receives the same fair process. I don't sentence for likes, and I don't acquit because of influence. I also know something else from experience. Public attention can tempt defendants into behaving even worse than they otherwise would. When they believe they're being watched, they start performing. They posture. They try to win the room instead of listening to it. I don't reward that instinct, not ever. A courtroom is not a stage. It is a place where the truth is supposed to be spoken safely, without an audience changing the terms of what's allowed. And when a witness's safety is on the line, the court has to be absolutely unshakable about it. When the defendant walked into my courtroom that morning, I felt the temperature of the room change. He was dressed like a man heading into a corporate board meeting, a tailored suit, a confident stride, an expression that suggested he already expected the day to bend in his direction. His attorney walked beside him, professional and composed, though I could tell within a few minutes that he was working to manage a client who did not enjoy being managed. The gallery was fuller than usual that day. Mr. Thompson sat near the front, hands folded, face composed and steady. A handful of veterans sat quietly behind him, watchful, clearly there in support. A couple of reporters sat further back, notebooks open. I looked at the defendant and said, "Good morning, sir. Step forward and state your name for the record." He did. I said, "You understand you're here on allegations involving threatening conduct and witness intimidation?" He let out a short sigh and said, "This is all blown out of proportion." I nodded slowly. "All right, then. We'll deal in facts." I turned slightly toward the gallery. "Mr. Thompson, would you step forward, please?" Mr. Thompson stood. He moved carefully, the way older men move when they've lived a life that demanded endurance from them for decades. There was nothing dramatic in it, nothing performed, no reaching for pity. I said, "Mr. Thompson, thank you for your service. Tell me what happened." He spoke calmly, his voice steady, even where the memory clearly wasn't easy to revisit. "Your Honor, I told him he couldn't park there. He got out, got close, and told me he'd ruin my life. Then later I got calls. I didn't feel safe." I looked over at the defendant. "Did you hear that?" He said, "I didn't feel safe." That's a serious statement. The defendant smirked, just barely, and said, "He's being sensitive." I felt my blood pressure climb a notch, and I had to take a breath before I responded. Not because I was in danger of losing control of myself, but because I wanted my words to land with precision instead of heat. I said, "Sir, let me tell you something. A courtroom is one of the few places left where a working man can stand up to a powerful man and simply tell the truth. If you mock that, you are mocking the entire idea of justice itself." His attorney rose. "Your Honor, my client denies making any threats. He admits there was an argument, but he maintains he did not intimidate anyone." I said, "Counsel, I appreciate your advocacy. We'll let the evidence speak." We played the bystander video first. The audio wasn't perfectly clean, but the tone underneath it was unmistakable. The defendant's voice loud and cutting, Mr. Thompson's voice calm, almost pleading, asking him to stop. Then we played the security footage. You could watch the defendant step in close, pointing, crowding the space between them. You could watch Mr. Thompson step backward, non-aggressive, simply trying to hold a boundary that kept slipping away from him. I paused the footage and looked at the defendant directly. "Sir, why are you standing that close to him?" He actually shrugged. "He was in my space." I shook my head. "No, the video shows you approaching him. You are the one closing the distance." He rolled his eyes at that, and I said, "Sir, don't roll your eyes in this court. That reaction alone tells me you still don't understand where you are right now." Then I asked him directly, "Did you tell him you could ruin his life?" He said, "I might have said something like, 'I know people. Everybody says things when they're annoyed.'" I leaned forward slightly. "Not everybody says things like that, and even if they did, it wouldn't make it acceptable. 'I know people' is not a normal expression of annoyance. It's a warning. It is intimidation, plainly and simply." I turned back to Mr. Thompson. "Mr. Thompson, did you feel threatened?" He nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor." The defendant let out a quiet laugh at that, and I remember thinking to myself, he still thinks fear is funny. He hasn't gotten there yet. At that point, my bailiff approached the bench and handed something to my clerk, who leaned in and showed me a set of screenshots, time-stamped social media posts, public commentary. I looked them over carefully because I always verify exactly what I'm being shown before I act on it. Then I looked back at the defendant. "Sir, did you post about this case on Snapchat?" He said, "Yeah, people were asking." I said, "This post is attributed to you. It reads, 'This judge is dramatic. This is literally nothing.' Did you write that?" He smirked again. "It's true." I let the silence sit in the room for a moment before I spoke. "Let me tell you what's not nothing. A witness coming into this court and telling the truth is not nothing. A 69-year-old veteran feeling afraid to do his job is not nothing." I held up the printout again. "And this one. This one says you're going to, quote, 'handle anyone who lies about you.' What did you mean by that?" He shifted in his seat. "It's just talk." I said, "Sir, threats are often just talk, right up until the moment someone acts on them, and I don't wait around for action once I've already seen the warning signs written out plainly." I turned to his attorney. "Counsel, do you have any explanation for these posts?" His face visibly tightened. "Your Honor, I was not aware of those. My client should not have posted anything during these proceedings." I nodded. "We agree on that much." Then I addressed the defendant again, directly. "Sir, my responsibility as a judge is to protect the integrity of these proceedings. When you threaten a witness, you're not only insulting Mr. Thompson personally, you are sending a message to every future witness who might ever consider coming forward: stay quiet or pay the price. I will not allow that message to stand in my courtroom." He tried to interrupt, raising his voice over mine. I raised a hand calmly. "No, you will not speak over me." He stopped, though his jaw stayed tight enough that I could see it from the bench. I said, "Here is what I need to know. Are you willing to accept responsibility for the fear you caused?" He answered, "I didn't cause fear. He chose to be scared." That single sentence told me everything I needed to understand about where his head was at, because it shifts the blame entirely onto the victim. It says, your reaction is your fault, rather than my conduct was wrong. That's a very telling difference, and I've learned to listen closely for it. If this kind of real courtroom accountability is why you keep coming back, subscribe now so you don't miss the next one. These stories deserve to be heard by more people than just this room. I looked over at Mr. Thompson and said, "Mr. Thompson, I want you to know something. You did the right thing coming here. This court takes what happened to you seriously." His eyes watered slightly, but he held himself steady the way I imagine he's held himself steady through a great many harder things in his life. That kind of dignity, at 69, after decades of service, after a lifetime of quiet work, deserves real respect, and I made sure he heard that from me directly. Then I turned back to the defendant. "Sir, I've been doing this a long time. I've seen young people make bad choices and turn their lives completely around, but it starts with humility." I paused before continuing. "And humility is not something your money can buy for you." That's when his expression changed, not into remorse exactly, more into something like surprise, as if he genuinely wasn't accustomed to anyone speaking to him this plainly, without softening it, without managing around his comfort. I continued, keeping my voice even. "I'm going to give you one more chance. Do you want to apologize to Mr. Thompson for threatening him and for posting about this case the way you did?" He hesitated. Then he said, "I'm sorry if he thought I meant it." I shook my head again. "That's not an apology. That's an excuse wearing polite language." His attorney leaned over and whispered something to him. The defendant looked down at the table for a moment. Then quietly he said, "I shouldn't have said those things. I'm sorry." I nodded. "That's better." But I still had a consequence to decide, because a courtroom cannot simply run on better once intimidation has already occurred and already done its damage. The consequence had to protect the witness going forward, deter this kind of behavior in others watching, and teach this particular young man that power does not come bundled with the right to frighten people into silence. And I knew in my heart, sitting there, that whatever I ordered was going to be life-changing for him. Not because I wanted to ruin him, I want to be very clear about that, but because he needed a hard stop, and nobody in his life up to that point had ever been willing to give him one. I've sat on this bench long enough to know that when a defendant threatens a witness, the court has to respond with firmness. Not emotion, not theater, firmness. I looked at him and said, "Sir, I want you to understand something." I paused deliberately. I have been a judge for 40 years. I've seen thousands of defendants pass through courtrooms like this one. Some are remorseful. Some are frightened. Some genuinely made a mistake they regret. I paused again, letting that settle before I continued. "But you used your status as a weapon. You tried to make a witness afraid to speak the truth." Then I addressed the Snapchat post directly one more time because I wanted it on the record clearly. "You posted during these proceedings that I'm dramatic, that this is literally nothing. Let me tell you exactly what's not nothing. A 69-year-old veteran sitting right there in this room came into court and told the truth. He served his country. He is trying to live out his retirement in peace. When you threaten him, you are telling him that his safety depends entirely on your mood." I let the silence hold in the room for a long moment. This sentence isn't about punishment for its own sake. It's about teaching you something you should have learned a long time ago: respect, accountability, and the understanding that your actions carry real consequences regardless of who your father is. Then I laid out the sentence in clear, structured terms, the way I always do, so there is no ambiguity later about what was ordered and why. Here's what I'm ordering. First, you will be subject to strict no-contact conditions with Mr. Thompson, direct or indirect, no calls, no messages, no reaching out through third parties. Any violation will result in immediate consequences, and I mean that. Second, you will be placed on supervised probation with conditions that include full compliance with all court orders, regular reporting, and whatever monitoring probation determines is appropriate. Third, you will complete a court-approved anger management and accountability program with proof of completion filed directly with this court. Fourth, you will perform community service and not a symbolic handful of hours. Service that puts you in proximity to real people, real work, and real accountability. The kind you clearly haven't had much exposure to up to this point in your life. Then I said the part I most wanted him to carry with him. Sir, you are not being punished for being a CEO's son. You are being held accountable for acting like other people don't matter. I let that sit for a second before continuing. I hope this changes you, because if it doesn't, the next time you attempt intimidation, you may find yourself facing consequences that are far harder to recover from. That's what I meant by life-changing. Not ruined, not destroyed, changed, forced, finally, to grow up a little. After I delivered the sentence, the courtroom settled into that particular kind of quiet that comes when the air finally clears. Mr. Thompson exhaled, and it wasn't a celebration, not really. It was relief. Relief that the system had actually heard him. Relief that he wasn't alone in this. The defendant sat still, staring straight ahead. And for the first time all day, he looked like a young man who was starting to understand that the world wasn't simply going to bend around him the way it always had before. His attorney leaned in close, speaking quietly, likely walking him through the conditions and just how seriously he needed to take compliance with them. After I adjourned the hearing, Mr. Thompson approached the area near the bench with permission and said, "Thank you, Your Honor." I told him the truth plainly. "Mr. Thompson, thank you for your service and thank you for your courage. It takes real strength to stand up to someone who tries to frighten you, especially someone with that much behind him." Later, my clerk mentioned the ruling had already started spreading online. Some people cheered, some criticized, some said, "Finally," some said he got off easy. That's always how it goes. The internet only ever sees a clip. The court sees the whole record, every page of it. But I'll tell you exactly what I told my own staff afterward. I didn't do this for views. I did it because intimidation is poison, and if you let it seep into a courtroom even once, justice stops being able to breathe in that room. And honestly, I hoped, and still hope, that this young man takes the one path that's still open to him: humility, responsibility, real change. Because I have seen young people turn their lives around completely. I've also seen them double down instead, dig in, get worse. The court can open the door. It's genuinely up to the person to walk through it. Before I close this one out, if you've made it this far, subscribing really does help these stories keep going. I appreciate every single one of you who does. So let me tell you plainly what I hope people take away from this case. First, threatening a witness is one of the most serious forms of disrespect you can show the rule of law. It isn't just a personal insult directed at one person. It's an attempt to silence the truth itself, and by extension, an attempt to silence everyone who might come forward after them. Second, social media is not real life, and posting that something is literally nothing doesn't make it nothing. It only shows the world that you don't yet understand the damage you've caused, or worse, that you understand it and simply don't care. And third, in my courtroom, it has never once mattered how important your family is, how expensive your suit is, or how connected you believe yourself to be. The courthouse is one of the last places left where power is genuinely supposed to stop at the door and wait outside with everyone else. I will always hold a particular respect for people like Mr. Thompson, veterans, elders, working people who show up quietly and do the job in front of them without asking for recognition. They deserve protection, not pressure, and as long as I'm sitting on this bench, that's exactly what they're going to get from me. After 40 years doing this work, I still believe, as firmly as I ever have, that respect isn't optional and accountability is never negotiable, no matter whose name is on the paperwork. If there's one thing I'd want anyone watching this to carry with them, it's this. Courage doesn't always look like something loud. Sometimes it looks exactly like a 69-year-old man standing quietly in a parking lot, refusing to move out of the way of the truth, even when someone with far more money and far more power tells him he should be afraid. That's the kind of courage this courtroom exists to protect. And as long as I have a gavel in my hand, that protection isn't going anywhere. I think about this case more than people would probably expect, given how many cases pass through a courtroom over 3 decades. Part of it is Mr. Thompson himself. I've had veterans in my courtroom before on both sides of the bench, as witnesses, as defendants, as family members sitting in the gallery holding someone else's hand through a hearing. There's a particular kind of steadiness you see in people who served, a way of absorbing pressure without letting it show on the surface. Mr. Thompson had that. He didn't come into my courtroom looking for sympathy or looking to be made into an example. He came in because he believed correctly that the system was supposed to protect him, and he was willing to test that belief out loud, in public, in front of the very person who told him to be afraid. And part of it is the defendant, honestly, because I don't think he was a monster. I want to be careful here because it would be easy to turn this into a simple story of a villain getting what he deserved, and that's not quite what I saw sitting up there. What I saw was a young man who had never once in his entire life been told no and had it stick. Every no he'd ever encountered had eventually bent because someone made a call or wrote a check or simply decided it wasn't worth the friction of holding the line against a family with that much reach. By the time he stood in front of me, he genuinely didn't seem to understand that a courtroom operates on different rules than the rest of his life had operated on. That confusion, more than cruelty, is what I saw on his face in the moments before he finally apologized. It wasn't the face of someone plotting harm. It was the face of someone encountering a wall for the first time and not knowing what to do with the fact that it wouldn't move. That doesn't excuse what he did. I want to be very clear about that because I've had people push back on me over the years for saying things like this as if understanding a defendant's background is the same as forgiving their conduct. It isn't, and it never has been in my courtroom. Understanding where someone came from helps me figure out what might actually change their behavior going forward. It has never once changed what I was willing to order to protect a witness standing in front of me. Those are two entirely separate questions, and conflating them is how courts end up failing the people who need them most. I also think about the systems that produce young men like this one, because he is far from the only defendant I've seen who grew up believing that consequences were something that happened to other people. Wealth insulates in ways that aren't always obvious from the outside. It's not just that money can sometimes buy better lawyers, though it can. It's that money buys distance from the ordinary friction of daily life, the kind of friction that teaches most people from a very young age that other people's boundaries matter because those other people have the power to make your life difficult if you ignore them. Take that friction away for long enough, and a person can grow into adulthood without ever really absorbing the lesson. Then one day they meet a 69-year-old security guard in a parking lot who has exactly the kind of quiet, immovable boundary that money was never able to erase. And the whole thing comes apart in about 90 seconds. I've thought about what would have happened if Mr. Thompson had been a younger man, someone without the steadiness that decades of service seem to build into a person. I've thought about what would have happened if there hadn't been a bystander with a phone recording or a security camera angled just right to catch the body language that told the real story. Cases like this one live or die on evidence like that. And I've seen far too many instances where a witness came forward with exactly this kind of story and simply couldn't prove it, not because it didn't happen, but because intimidation, by its very nature, tends to happen quietly, out of frame, in places no camera happens to be pointed. Those cases haunt me more than this one does, honestly, because in those cases I've had to look at a frightened witness and tell them that fear, on its own, without corroboration, isn't always enough to act on. That's one of the hardest parts of this job, and it never gets easier no matter how many years you put in. But this case had the evidence layered and consistent, and that let me do exactly what the job requires: protect the person telling the truth and hold the person threatening him fully accountable. I don't get to do that every time. I got to do it that day, and I remain grateful for it. Thanks for sitting through this whole story with me. If you want more of these, the best way to get them is simple: hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and I'll see you in the next one.